Why do the words that people use matter so much? You're watching Making Sense with Robbie? Let's get started. A good example of this is the use of terrorists versus freedom fighters. You're looking at the situation, they're the same thing. Like someone who is a freedom fighter is fighting for freedom, and someone who is a terrorist is creating terror, but they're both basically using violence to reach their objectives. And so it depends on if you are supposed to support the person or you're supposed to have a negative view of them about what word would make the most sense to describe the person and the action. But regardless, it is manipulating the way that we feel about something based on the words that are being used to describe it. People can manipulate language. They can use some words or other words, adjust the way that people understand or perceive or sort of take in what is being said. It can be used to sort of guide our emotions, or it can be used to bypass our rationality. The use of words can manipulate the way that we understand topics or issues or events. Loaded words, you might say something like, this is a reform, or you could say this is a change. And the use of the word, say, reform, it sort of isn't a common word, and so it sounds a little bit more scary, whereas change is sort of something that's normal, that happens all the time. But the same outcome is going to happen, right? Things are going to change, and so you can call it a reform or you can call it a change. We can use simple common words, or we can use complex words that might seem more scary. And at times, the words that are used are more important than the message, than what is actually being said. This is why, if something's really boring, it can be said in an interesting way, and then people will be engaged. Or vice versa, if something is really important, it can be said in a way that makes it boring or uninteresting so that people don't pay attention. Sometimes people will use specific words or language to distract us or hide the meaning of what they're trying to say. If you don't want someone to understand what you're saying, or you want to sort of mislead them or misdirect them, then you can choose certain sets of words to use to describe something. Whereas if you want them to understand, then you can use sort of simple, clear, regular words that people are used to hearing. And that's going to have different outcome. If you use words that are sort of scary and unknown, then people aren't going to understand. Whereas if you use simple words, then people are going to understand. So it really depends on the person who is trying to influence, or the person who's trying to sort of change this other person's perspective. What is their intention? If they're trying to manipulate you, then they might use words in one way. Whereas if they're trying to inform you in an accurate and fair way, then they're going to use different words. Oftentimes, ideas are very complex and complicated, and they might require specialized words to describe them, so that there's that nuance and there's that detail. But by simplifying something, you can either take away all of its meaning, or you can make it something that's easier to understand. So while, manipulating language can have different types of outcomes, it sort of depends on what the person who is saying its intention is, what their goal is. Are they trying to deceive you by the words that they choose? There's also things like polarizations, where you can make it seem like there's two polar extremes, there's two very different ideas, and that they are competing. And this can be done with manipulation or word choice. And there can also be things like intensifications, which is where someone focuses on the things that people disagree with rather than the things that they have in common or that they agree with. And probably in most of life experience, maybe we have 99% in common with the people around us, as far as all of the things that matter to us, or all of the things that affect our day-to-day lives. But there's this 1% of things that are different, that we have different views of, that we think differently about. And so focusing on those things can kind of manipulate the way that people understand things. Probably everyone thinks or agrees that things should be fair, that people should have a place to live, and they should have food to eat. And I think all those things are pretty common. All people need those things, and all people value those things. But then the way that you describe how people get those things is a way to sort of manipulate or influence the way that people think about it. And that could be the way sort of that they're divided, or that they feel there's uncommon ground, even though generally they have the same sort of values and they believe in the same sort of outcome. And in a sense, appeals to emotion or appeals to authority are about manipulating language. In an appeal to authority, instead of discussing facts and details and sort of evidence, they're just talking about this person is the person to trust. And so that's sort of a manipulation of language, because it's about sort of giving authority. It's building up the sense of authority for that person, as opposed to what they're actually saying. And then an appeal to emotion, right? Again, it's using highly emotional words, using words that engage fear or hope, are good ways of getting people to kind of go along with an idea, regardless of the evidence, because those words are emotional, or like at least the words that can be chosen can push someone into sort of a fearful response or a hopeful response. And it's a matter of the words that are being chosen. The outcome or the sort of the story or the plot could be exactly the same, but it's just the words that are used that sort of influence how a person feels about it, how they're going to come out of that sort of story or that event, and like what they're going to think about it in the end, and what actions or what things they think will need to be done as a result. And language manipulation is pretty common, and it would probably most likely be happening more often in scripted content, because when there's a script, then you're giving, like, the writer has time to sort of think about what they want to say, and they have time to sort of choose the right words. And so there's like the ability, or there's more likely to be an influence when there's like a script. When someone's talking at random, it might be harder to manipulate the language, kind of like the words that they have thought about will come out first. Whereas like if you're slowing down and you have like a script, then there's an ability to sort of engage or change the language to manipulate the way that the person who's hearing it understands it and makes sense of it. And so this is something to keep in mind, that the sort of language manipulation is probably pretty common, especially on mediums like movies or television shows where there's a script. So when someone is saying something, ask yourself, like, are they trying to manipulate me? Are they trying to influence the way that I'm thinking about this by the words that they're choosing? Am I listening to, or am I hearing sort of the emotions that are being incited by these words? Or am I actually like listening to the content, to the facts, to the details of what's being said? So I was watching this movie, and it was like the science fiction movie, and it was about this like sort of police state, and there was like TV channels, and there wasn't a lot of shows on, but like one of the channels that they went to was this channel where the people said big words that don't mean anything. And I remember actually reading studies where they said that like words that sound sort of fancy, words that sound big and elegant, like are more likely to like make people are going to be more engaged with it. They're more likely to believe it, even if the person's actually not saying anything, even if they're just rambling on. As long as they're like using like words that sound difficult, that sound complicated, that it's going to make people sort of believe that there's sort of truth there, that something important is being said. And that's an interesting idea, because it's kind of related to this. You can choose the types of words that you want to tell your story, and that's going to influence the way that people perceive it, regardless of what the underlying story is or what the facts of the matter are. It's difficult too to say like what is the right way, what is the cleanest way to say something. Like how do you say something in a way that you aren't manipulating someone? And so this is always going to be a part of conversation. This is always going to be a part of understanding. But at least if you have some awareness of it, it's going to help a little bit, because it's going to help you be a little bit more aware of the fact that someone might be saying something with a certain words because those words have a different effect than other words might have. And sort of one thing that I've noticed as well for myself is that like I don't really watch a lot of news on the television, but do see it. Like I do notice sort of the use of language manipulation. Maybe something that isn't so obvious if you're used to consuming something, but like if you kind of step away from it for a little bit and then you go back to it, then you do tend to notice like the things that are different, the things that stand out. And so I would suspect that the media often uses sort of sensationalized language, and a big reason or a motivation for that is because you want to get people to be engaged, you want them to keep on watching, but you also want them to click, kind of get them to pay attention in the first place. And so that's why like this like language manipulation has to happen. At least that's one of the reasons why. But that like kind of has like an emergent effect in that it influences the way that people think about things, sometimes in a way that is sort of irrational or not following the logic or evidence. They're just sort of falling for the words in a sense. So my message to you is like, just be careful, like pay attention, understand what words people are using, and think about why they're using those words in opposed to other words. Are they trying to manipulate you? Are they trying to influence you? Are they trying to make you think about this topic or this event in a way that isn't accurate or doesn't represent reality? So let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think that language manipulation is a common thing? Have you ever had your thoughts and views of something manipulated because of the words that someone used in opposed to what they were actually saying? If you found this informative or entertaining, click that like button. If you are curious about learning how to think about things but you don't want to be told what to think about them, click that subscribe button, because that's what I'm here for. You've been watching Making Sense with Robbie. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk next time. Goodbye.